Good morning, fellow hat nerds. Yeah, I don't even know how I made it, right? Um, if it's coming through in my voice, I had a long night of Mets baseball. It was a good night. Our boys won. For anybody that might be interested, hopefully, you know, uh, no Nationals fans, although I don't know if I say hopefully. Um, we do uh, again, I this kind of started off as a combined hat and baseball channel. I do have a separate Mets channel now, only because I figured I wanted to keep this channel kind of purely focused on fine hats. But uh, you know, I'm because the Mets and my hats are day to day. You will probably hear me kind of talk about the Mets a little bit, but not too much. Um, all I know is I had a great time last night with my son and his girlfriend, um, and on top of that, we managed to get a victory. So good night. The side effect is that I'm a little bit hoarse from yelling. Um, so it's yeah. I don't know. I don't know how far I'm gonna make it today. I've already moved past the coffee portion of my day. Now I'm strictly on my fizzy drink. So I don't know. I don't know how long this can last. I mean, it all really depends on, uh, you know, how many folks we get on here, if any at all. And yeah, I always try to do what I can, and I always have a. We don't really have a set stopping point when it comes to these live streams, right? Usually it's as far as I can go or as far as participation goes here. Yesterday we had a 3 hour show. And again, I'm no stranger, I guess, to the 3 hour show, but it was kind of different because I felt like there wasn't really a lot of filler. We had a lot of participation. We had my moderator, Morgan Brown, that joined us. We had Paul Murphy from PJ Murphy and Son Hatters out in the UK, and we had a new viewer, Ian, who joined us for the first time and added to the great conversation. So it basically was more or less the four of us kind of nerding out over hats and whatever's kind of sprung to the top of our heads at that moment. Um, so yeah, I don't know. Like I said, right now everything has been going daily for this channel for the Hat Chat series, and I'll still keep it daily for as long as my energy levels allow me to. Obviously, you know, one is whether I can actually do the show. Two is how long I can do the show. Um, so for right now, I'm gonna try to keep doing this daily. Like I mentioned yesterday, like the hat of the day is really kind of just a straw man, so that I'm able to start a conversation. If I'm by here by myself, like I am right now, that at least gives me a little structure to kind of open up a monologue while I wait for some of my hat nerds to join. But either way, it's kind of just a nice therapeutic touch point to be able to go and interact. And yesterday's show was just I was I was touched. I was flabbergasted. By the participation that I had here yesterday, and I'm like I love it. That's exactly why I did. I started this channel was to kind of get that interaction with my fellow hat nerds, and that way we can kind of all learn from each other. Like I learned, I think the thing that springs to the top of my head was when Morgan shared that Morgan lives in New York City. She's my moderator. um, Morgan's only 19, and that's another thing I learned yesterday. I had no idea. Like it doesn't really, I guess it really doesn't matter. I shouldn't care about how old somebody is, but I care in the good way, meaning that one of the main themes from yesterday's conversation was my uh, personal opinion that we as older hat enthusiasts, as fine hat enthusiasts, we owe it to our fellow hat nerds to try to welcome and try to ease the transition into fine hats, as and make that transition as easy as possible for younger folks, younger generations that are even more far removed from the heyday of hats. You know, I don't, you everybody has their kind of pull about what brings them into this hobby. For some folks, they are kind of multi-generation. I mentioned this yesterday. They are coming from a long line of hat wearers or even hat makers, and they are following the tradition, right? It's kind of like when folks have the tradition of military service in their family, and it you basically kind of were born into the hat hobby, and you kind of knew that you were going to either be a hat wearer or collector, or at least you had that growing up. And then others like myself, I guess I have that family background, right? My grandfather was a hat wearer, but my dad wasn't. My dad, he came from that era that was the decline of hat wear. My dad was always known, and I talked about like Kennedy with his coif. My dad was somebody that kind of prided himself in having like that pushback hair, and he had the mustache. Um, it was kind of the look for the gentleman of the day. My dad kind of, I guess he was in his 20s uh, as the hat. When Kennedy was assassinated, right? And I know Kennedy was like one of those administrations that is synonymous with the decline of hat wear in the U.S. My dad was in his 20s, so again, in his 20s, and just recently in the United States, and he was living out in New Jersey. So my dad was kind of like that first generation, probably, that had he wasn't going to wear a hat. I mean, again, I never really picked my dad's brain about like his hat history, but I know growing up and being in the house, my dad rarely wore a hat. If he did, it was kind of just a thing where he didn't have a chance to kind of get his hair done, so he'd wear a ball cap, to kind of cover up his hair that he hadn't had a chance to take care of. But you can compare that to my granddad, so my dad's dad, who wouldn't leave. He wouldn't be seen really anywhere without his hat, and by all means, he was a farmer. So if somebody's out in the fields, he's gonna wear a hat. Maybe not like a fine hat, but he'd probably have a straw hat, or some sort of protection from the elements, because, well, one, he wasn't driving an automobile every day. I don't even know if my granddad owned an automobile. My granddad eventually did make it over to the U.S., but this was kind of after his, a good deal of his sons. So my dad and a lot of his brothers made it over first in the late 50s, and kind of established themselves. All got employment, and it was were able to collectively pool their money to be able to bring my dad, back, back with them to the states. And one of the best stories that my dad has, my dad started off, I believe, his the job that he eventually stuck with. I think he did a couple of different jobs when he first got to the United States, but one of the jobs that I think kind of stuck and fit his lifestyle and his personality was that of a taxi driver. So my dad started off as a taxi driver in like that New York, New Jersey area, and my dad drove a cab all throughout my recollection from childhood. So, essentially, I know my dad did other things, but his main source of income was driving a cab. And from that, my dad gained a lot of knowledge, right? So it's one of those things where research will even show that the brains of cab drivers, right prior to the advent of GPS. Like we kind of all know, I know I kind of grew up in that when GPSs started become a little bit more of a mainstay, right? You had those Garmin's, right? Everybody remembers the Garmin GPS that, at least me, needed to be updated, right? So you essentially had to pay Garmin a fee to get your GPS updated, and I never paid the fee. So essentially, over time, you bought this map, this electronic map that if you didn't pay for the updates became outdated, right? So as infrastructure changed, um, and this is again prior to cell phones, the proliferation of cell phones and data bearing cell phones. Like nobody, when cell phones came out, they did not have, you didn't have Google Maps, you didn't have any of that stuff. Cell phones, basically, when that came about, you just used it to talk. And then text messaging became more popular. And then ultimately that led to the smartphone. And then people was like, well, no longer need Garmin, and we don't have to pay anything to Garmin because now we have smartphones that are automatically updated, right, via a cellular connection. So, I mean, it really is remarkable. But prior to all that, essentially all you had was maybe a physical paper map, right? But ultimately, after that map, all you really had was trial and error, right? So my dad, through becoming a taxi driver, essentially came to knew came to know the New York, New Jersey metropolitan area, maybe even some of Pennsylvania, so that tri-state area in the Northeast, um, really well. Like it was uncanny how well he knew the city. Obviously it made sense given his profession, but it was uncanny how well he knew the city. And one of my favorite stories was my dad talking about how proud he was to be able to with the help of his brothers, bring his dad, my granddad, back to into the United States, right? They kind of pooled their money and purchased a house for my dad and his and my grandma, my dad's mom, um, and then basically my dad showing my granddad around the city. So he took him on a whirlwind tour around the city, to kind of show him all the sites. Typically, it's typical of what you kind of would see, if you have family, if you're from New York and you have family that are visiting, especially from a place that is not a big city. It's really kind of a treat, and you kind of just take for granted, right? When you live in New York City, you take it for granted all the big buildings and all the things there is to see, because you're just living, right? And obviously, a lot of the folks that grew up in the boroughs, like I did, I grew up a Brooklyn boy. You didn't venture out to the city all that often, right? One because you didn't have probably the money to spend to really take in a lot of the what it is that the city Manhattan had to offer. And the other part was, back when I grew up, you kind of just stood in your neighborhood, right? I think a lot of the folks that I know that grew up in Spanish Harlem, they grew up uptown in Washington Heights, um, and the greater Bronx area. I think we had that commonality that, up until like a certain point, I'm sure that changed. Um, at some point, I just don't know when it changed, but you kind of were like in a way locked into your neighborhood. You didn't venture out because, one, it was kind of dangerous to venture out of your neighborhood. There were, there was a lot of gangs that existed. Um, at least when I grew up, and prior to when I grew up, there was a really big gang culture in New York City, and obviously they still exist, but I'm just a little bit more removed. But they were very territorial. And besides gangs, like formal, like established gangs, you had what we kind of knew and grew up, were crews, right? Little street crews. And all they were really a bunch of kids that lived in the same neighborhood that kind of got a little bit more organized about it. Maybe they gave their crew a name. I just remember there was like a crew called the Parkside Boys. that were off Park Avenue. Um, and there were a couple of them, and sometimes they gave each other like acronym names, right? They sometimes there'll be like something like HBO, right? Because HBO was kind of becoming a fixture at the time, and then they'll come up with an acronym. I think WHT was another rival network to HBO. So you'd have like a crew that called themselves WHT, there was a bunch of them, and they weren't really gangs per se. They were really more like just a collection of friends that wanted to kind of like they wore beads, right? They would have colors, and they wore beads to represent those colors. And they were kind of like, the beads that they wore were less gang related than it were like friendship bracelets, right? It's like, you have somebody that wears the same beads. And they were like, okay, these are our bead colors, and these are like, we wear them because that way we kind of show it's kind of like a uniform without being a uniform. And I know that sounds weird because, like, I could hear somebody in their head thinking, like, Luke, that sounds just like a gang, right? Anybody that kind of knows about like the LA gang culture out in the West Coast, they know about the colors, right? The blues and the reds, the Crips and the Bloods. But again, never being part of a crew per se, but seeing my older brothers and their friends, uh, you never thought of a crew as a gang. Certainly, there were some things that you did because it was protection, right? Um, but it was not any different than just having a set of friends that kind of watched your back. Maybe you guys hung out on the same block. You guys had a place that you hung out. And then you kind of grew up together and looked out for one another. And so yeah, again, not to glorify anything that's related to gangs. Just FYI, I mentioned this on a different live stream, a different hat chat series, is that I grew up. Well, my formal training is in organizational psychology. So a part of the lens that I view this idea of gangs, organized crime, gangs, crews, anything like that is from a lens of organizational behavior. Because again, that's what I've trained in doing. So it's fascinating to me to view that in psychological terms, organizational psychology, and to see how these organizations that are not they're not Apple, they're not Amazon, they're not Microsoft, they're not at that scale. They're not there necessarily to have shareholders, but they are shareholders. They are stakeholders in these things, right? They're members, right? These members have families. They have rules. Sometimes some of them are more laid out and concrete than others. And sometimes they dole out discipline to each other only to keep each other's in line. And a lot of that also is because sometimes the parents are working. One or more parents are working, or one or more parents are not even around. It's just one of the unfortunate states of growing up in a city, and trying to survive day to day, and make sure that you make it home. You go outside to play, and then you're able to make it back home for dinner. And yeah, it's just what it is. I don't know how to explain it. I think a lot of the folks that kind of grew up in kind of a more urban area like I did. So if you didn't grow up in New York, maybe you grew up in Chicago, or you grew up in LA, or you grew up in Miami, or Boston, Baltimore, DC. These are just like these major urban hubs that you kind of if you don't know, you didn't experience exactly like the way I experienced it, you did experience it somewhat similarly, with your own unique twist. And you knew that you just had a set of boys that were around you that kind of looked out for you, and you looked out for them, and just made sure that you guys came back safe. So you know, it, it's just it's unique, and it's definitely something that you can kind of see dramatized in like shows like The Wire, shows like movies like The Warriors. Um, and I really relate to that. And again, I view these films, one, from my own personal experience and having grown up in that era, New York City, Brooklyn, to be specific, in the 80s, and early 90s, before I moved out to the greater DC area in the 2000s. Um, but yeah, it's a unique experience, and it colors my view of the world, and my formal training in organizational psychology colors my view of my past. My past, it colors my view of my present, and then how I view the future. As I got into the workforce, and I interacted with people that didn't grow up the way I grew up. I think that's when we go to college, right? And I definitely have opinions about like the role of college in shaping one's experience. But as we go into college, in particular, I think for me, it started in high school. I went um, to a high school that was, most people would know it as a magnet school, right? A magnet school, is for me, and again, I don't know the formal definition, but is one in which you have to kind of go through a selection process. For the folks that are familiar with the New York area, I went to Brooklyn Technical High School, and Brooklyn Tech, you might, if you didn't grow up in New York, you might have heard of Brooklyn Tech, because there was a um, there was a show called Head of the Class in the 80s. And that show was based out of the theme around that show was a classroom full um, of and this is called nerds, right? They went to a fictional high school, New York high school, called Fillmore High School. And In that show, they would have competitions against other New York City high schools. And one of the things is, even though Fillmore, the school that was dramatized in the show, the main focal point was fictional, the schools that they competed against were not. So if you didn't know that and you just know the show, they competed against Brooklyn Tech, Bronx Science, and Stuyvesant High School. And I think those were kind of like the big three magnet schools in the area at the time. So when I was in junior high school, me and some of my friends that did pretty well, we were encouraged to go and apply, uh, to take the test, to get into these magnet schools. And I think you had to have like a certain score. Bronx Science was not going to be in a place I went to, right? Remember, I told you when I grew up in Brooklyn, going to the Bronx was like unheard of. Like you didn't do that unless you had some family out there, or you had some tie to the Bronx. And shout out to my folks from the Bronx. You just didn't do that. So there was no way I was gonna go to Bronx Science, even if I got in. Stuyvesant was a possibility, right? So Stuyvesant, I think, was at the apex of that magnet school system, and I think you had to have a high score. I don't think I got a score high enough to get into Stuyvesant. Even if I did, I was probably not going, because it was something similar to the Bronx, maybe to a lesser degree, but Manhattan was kind of still another uncharted territory for a Brooklyn kid like me. Um, Luckily, if you did test high enough, and to go to Stuyvesant, you had the option to still choose to go to, let's say, Brooklyn Tech. So that's I think it was me and I want to say like, uh, okay, what it was me and maybe four other kids from my junior high school that got into that tested into a magnet school. I think all of us, except for one, were just we didn't score high enough for Stuyvesant. So we went to Brooklyn Tech. The other person that did score high enough to go to Stuyvesant, because he was a Brooklyn boy like myself, he opted to go to Brooklyn Tech. I think part of it was because, one, he knew all of us were going to Brooklyn Tech, um, and and I think he had the same trepidation that I would have had. Was okay. I don't know anybody at Stuyvesant right now. I got to go into Manhattan by myself. Let me just go to Brooklyn Tech. At least I know these other folks that I went to junior high school, and we can kind of look out for each other. But man, Brooklyn Tech was an eye opener for me, in many levels, right? One, I kind of grew up kind of always being at the top of my class. But when I went to Brooklyn Tech, these were filled. This school was filled with people that were at the top of their class. And they were probably just much more advanced, and they had a greater, I want to say, just intellectual pedigree. And for the first time, I was no longer surrounded by just other Puerto Rican kids and other Dominican kids and other Black kids. Now I was going to school with, lots of Asians, lots of folks from other Caribbean backgrounds, folks from Indian and Pakistani backgrounds. It really was a ginormous melting pot where I started going to school. I think when I was in junior high school, we might have, like when I was in eighth grade, right, which is the last year before high school, at least for me. I don't know if that's still the case now. But when I was in eighth grade, I think we had two kids that were Korean in my junior high school. And I think their parents owned one of the local Korean groceries. But nobody really talked to them, It was just kind of like they were just two weird kids. Everybody's like, whoa, I wonder what they're like. But then lo and behold, a year later, I find myself at Brooklyn Tech. And I think 40% of Brooklyn Tech was like Asian, of some sort of Asian background. So it was an eye opener, right? For me culturally, where, I go from high school where I'm surrounded with people that look more like me. Hey, good morning, Morgan. Hey, I was just talking about my background in Brooklyn, just to kind of pass the time. I was talking about my high school. I went to Brooklyn Tech. Um, and Morgan, I don't know what high school you went to. We probably are just recently out, given that you're 19. But I went to Brooklyn Technical High School, and I was just, that's in the Fort Greene. So folks that may or may not be familiar when they watch this later on, if you're familiar with New York City, and Morgan is from New York City. So I went to Brooklyn Tech High School, which, kind of, has a reputation in the Brooklyn area. It's at some point, I think, was known as the highest structure in Brooklyn, before like Brooklyn really started building these high structures, only because Brooklyn Tech had this radio tower on top of the building itself. It's a really old school. They really like had the old school desks. So anybody that's been to Brooklyn Tech or been to some of these older high schools in New York, I have no idea. It's been so long since I visited a high school. I don't think I set foot in a high school in New York after I graduated in the 90s. But Brooklyn Tech, and I'm guessing if they didn't really renovate the school, you'd probably still see those desks, and you kind of know if I maybe one day I'll post a photo of that desk. Oh my gosh, I'm like, these are like the original desks, And then talk about notable alumni. I think the notable alumni that we had from Brooklyn Tech was Lou Ferrigno, right? So if anybody who knows or doesn't know Lou Ferrigno was famous for being one of Arnold Schwarzenegger's bodybuilding peers, right? So when Schwarzenegger won Mr. Universe like 7 times in a row, one of his greatest competitors was Lou Ferrigno, who was an Italian guy from Brooklyn. He was also half deaf. And then later on, after he quit competitive bodybuilding, or at least after he went away, he kind of followed Schwarzenegger into show business. Except that Schwarzenegger became a leading man in an action movie star, but Lou Ferrigno was he was most well known for playing the Incredible Hulk, right? So this was a guy who was 6'5", 6'5", half deaf Italian guy that was just built even taller than even he was one of the tallest competitors of his era. If you know a little bit about bodybuilding in that era, you didn't really have tall guys like Lou Ferrigno. I think Schwarzenegger was like 6'1", 6'2", and he was a tall guy. But Ferrigno was even taller at 6'5". So he had this incredible physique and incredible mass for a guy that size. But he was a Brooklyn Tech alumni. So essentially, again, he had a test in. So that means he had at least a little bit of capacity to pass that test and to get into Brooklyn Tech. So, yeah. So just in case I'm sure there's other alumni that probably were even more famous. I just can't recall. When I was going to school to Brooklyn Tech in the 90s, in the early to mid 90s, everybody just talked about, hey, did you know that Lou Ferrigno went to this school? And we had others. There was there was a rapper, I think Talib Kweli. So if you guys are fans of hip hop music, Talib Kweli, I believe, went to Brooklyn Tech. I don't think it was Mos Def. I think it was Talib Kweli that went to Brooklyn Tech, and that was after my era, I believe. But shout out to Mos Def and Talib Kweli, two Brooklyn natives that really put out really positive music in the 90s when they combined to form as Black Star. And another tidbit about Brooklyn Tech, if you are a Brooklyn fan, is that besides being in that downtown kind of Fort Greene area, right, that people kind of know what we know now is home to the Barclays Center. But before the Barclays, I think one of the things that were synonymous with downtown Brooklyn was Junior's Cheesecake, right? So I think hopefully Junior's still exists. Morgan, I don't know if you're still there. Do you know if Junior still exists in downtown Brooklyn? I hope so, because Junior's was iconic for their cheesecake. Downtown Brooklyn was known for Junior's cheesecake, and gotta love Juniors. They're still around. Good. Thank goodness for Juniors, right? Another good place if you guys like cheesecake and you want to venture outside of downtown Brooklyn, there's a place off of 11th Street. I think it's 11th Street between 1st and 2nd Avenue in the city. That's called Vineros. Vineros, I think, is the actual way you pronounce it. But I always called it Vineros. Excellent. You can't get a bad thing at Vineros, So I highly recommend Vineros in the city. But if you just want to stick to Brooklyn, I'm gonna shout out Juniors, because Juniors is iconic, right? It's kind of like Geno's for cheesesteaks in Philly, and Pat's. Hey, Ian, how's it going? Thank you for joining back up with us. Morgan was here. Maybe Morgan will come back, but thank you so much for coming back. Shout out to Ian. Ian, I believe, is also in the UK, right, Ian? Ian had some really good input yesterday that I really enjoyed and stuck with me. One, Ian is a fan of the Dillinger, the Dillinger movie that portrayal by Johnny Depp. That was amazing. What a great movie, Public Enemy. Yes, London. Shout out to London. Ian, I don't know if you got a chance to look at some of my past videos, but I forget what number it was, but I profiled Moores, the hat maker Moores, because I have a Moores Hamburg that I acquired from Kevin Todd Berger of Hats and Guitars. And Moores, great. Oh, my cat is yelling. I'm sure he's hungry. He's forever hungry. He's kind of like me that way. But I'm testing out a new mic, by the way. I might have mentioned this in the pinned comment there, but this is a brand new microphone. It's a wireless lapel mic that I have right here, and I'm hoping that this improves the audio. I replay some of my videos. Yes, Oliver, I gotcha. Basically, my audio seemed a little dicey when I replayed back some of my videos. So I'm hoping this makes the audio better. I don't know. I will listen back once I'm done with the live stream today, but you guys can tell me whether the audio comes out better. Hopefully it's not worse. That's what I'm really scared about, is that somehow I get worse. But if that does turn out to be the case, what I'll do is I'll just return this. I've got it on Amazon. Um, and I'll just return it. And maybe I'll buy a different one. I don't know. What I'm trying to avoid is one of those stand up mics. Yes, my cat is really yelling up. I think he wants to be. I don't know if anybody here also owns a cat, but Oliver, my cat, uh, he really, like, just like a lot of other cats. He starts yelling when he sees a closed door. Yeah, audio is fine. Thank you, Ian. I appreciate it. And now that I know that you're a musician, I bet, I think I respect your opinion, that much more about audio. Shout out to all my musicians. I think, besides movie stars, which I don't think, Oliver, please stop playing with hey, Oliver's playing with the shade. So hopefully that doesn't come out on the thing. Hey, Oliver. Oliver. Okay, I'm trying to distract him. He's playing with the shade on the window and it's creating a ruckus. He's just trying to get attention. I see you, buddy. Yes. You're gonna come out here. I'll get you a fedora as well. I actually have a great photo of Oliver in a fedora that I photoshopped, obviously, because I doubt. I mean, I'm sure there's a way to get a fedora on him, but I don't want. I want to respect him. Yeah. Hey, Morgan. Uh, um, yeah, I was just talking about Ian's mention of the Dillinger portrayal by Johnny Depp yesterday in that movie Public Enemy. Great movie. I actually own it, and I think I don't. It's been a while. It's been a while since I've seen that movie. I don't even remember a whole lot, but I do own it. And I'm gonna rewatch that just because Ian mentioned it. And the other reason is because I do love Johnny Depp. You know, Johnny Depp can really do no wrong in terms of the movies, right? We talked about Donnie Brasco, iconic Johnny Depp movie. There's just so many that you can't rattle off. Edward Scissorhands. And obviously if you're a fan of the series 21 Jump Street, then you got really early Johnny Depp before he became the movie star that he is now. But now, besides being a movie star, he's also an ambassador for the hat community. I can't count the number of times I've seen a photo of Johnny Depp wearing his Borsellino Alessandria model, which is an iconic hat model now. I think it was iconic before Johnny Depp wore it, but now it's even more so. It's kind of like the Johnny Depp hat now, that people know and people love. So I think that's just wonderful to see. We talked about Nicolas Cage as well. I don't know if Nicolas Cage has a hat that he's made iconic, but the other iconic thing is The Godfather, right? I think Al Pacino in The Godfather made the Hamburg that much more. I mean, it was prestigious before Pacino, right? Obviously, The Godfather came out in the 70s, and we know that there were so many other folks that famously wore the Hamburg. Winston Churchill being one of them, that helped make that reputation even before Pacino donned it in The Godfather. But again, I think when The Godfather was made, they knew that a gentleman, I think the Godfather, original Godfather, took place somewhere in the 40s or 50s, in like the more modern iteration. So the Hamburg would have been, if you were going to be a man that was a man of respect, and I'm just gonna say man of respect because I believe you didn't see women wearing Hamburgs, in that era. I think women wore hats, but they just wore a different style. But if you were a distinguished gentleman and somebody of stature, you're gonna don the Hamburg, right? Just like if you were like earlier on, you were gonna don a top hat, right? You weren't probably wearing a pork pie hat during that era unless you were a musician, which again was, you know, a musician was a notable profession, and definitely very influential. But if you were a political figure, you weren't going to probably be seen in a pork pie hat. That's something that a pork pie hat was done by Buster Keaton. Obviously, you had the bowler. Excuse me. The bowler, I think, was somewhere in between. I know that At some point, the bowler was also kind of a little bit more formal, right? So I feel like in terms of the order of formality, you still had the top hat on top, on top, no pun intended, or intended. Then you had the Hamburg, then you had the bowler, and then you had the more casual pork pies. I think somewhere in there you had boaters and straw hats and Panamas and all that stuff. But I believe that was like maybe the pork pie was somewhere there, or maybe the pork pie was the lowest on the rung. I don't know. But somebody else that kind of knows, maybe somebody like Paul or Ian can opine on that, or Morgan, and maybe you've have learned that as well in your now that I know that you're 19, now I know, okay, your hat journey is probably just beginning, and I'm excited because Morgan, you already know so much. Can you imagine what 40-year-old Morgan's gonna be like in terms of like hat knowledge and like the culture? I think in 20 years, I'm hoping I'm still alive, and hopefully I'm still making content and making new friends. So, and hopefully Morgan will still be here and hanging out with me on my streams if that is the case. But yeah, I think I'll be in 20 years. I'll be like pushing 70. But I'll tell you, I if I my dad's 86 now, my mom's 80. So if I get to, hopefully I'm able to safeguard my health and I can stick around long enough, long enough, or as long as my parents have, and as long as some of my other family members um, that are doing great. Right, my dad's not walking so well, and he's got a little bit of dementia, but all means he looks okay. My mom's doing okay, and then I have other family members that are not blood related, but I consider them family that are into their 70s and beyond. One of them is 97 and still doing well. Has a little bit of dementia, but is looking great and doing great. And I hope that, like I said, I don't need to live forever. I just want to be able to live as long as I can still enjoy the things that I love, like walking, like my watches, and my hats. When I don't enjoy those anymore, then maybe I think it'll be a time where I want to kind of move on, right, and see what the next thing is, right, and then let folks like Morgan here, the next generation, take over. And then just and you guys, if you guys got Morgan, like Gen Z and whatever comes after Gen Z, if you got somebody like Morgan as your ambassador, I think you guys are in good hands. The hope behind this is to pay it forward, right? There's going to be a new generation and many more to come, like, right, as long as we don't wipe each other out, with some kind of stupid action and we blow up this planet, which I'm hoping that never happens. But until then, there will be human beings, that there will be people that are into hats, I'm hoping, and Morgan is going to lead that charge, um, way after way after somebody like myself and some of the other folks that hopefully will provide a good foundation. Anyhow, I'm getting a little a little sappy here, but I just want to make sure that I don't forget to say things like that, because you never know who's like I said, you never know who's watching, right? Morgan and Ian, you kind of been here a couple times. You kind of know what I'm about. But somebody that watches this video sometime down the road, that just like, I don't know anything about hats, but let me listen to what this guy has to say. I got to do that because, like I said, this might be the only video they watch. And sometimes repetition is not a bad thing. I'm guilty of repeating myself all the time. It's only because sometimes I do it for myself, right? Right? Sometimes you kind of say it enough times so that it becomes ingrained in your way of thinking, and you speak it into existence, right? It's like visualization. And what you want to do is say it, right? And sometimes if you just want to become it, you just say it first, right? And it becomes like the idea of fake it till you make it, right? And I know a lot of people don't like that phrase. I happen to love it, because it's just what it's synonymous with the way I think about things. And there's room for growth no matter how old you are. I'm still growing. I'm pushing 50, but I'm still growing every day, and I'm trying to refine. Maybe there's not a revolution that's happening with Luke as he goes forward every day to day, but there is an evolution. Um, and part of that has been my hats, you know. Even though, like I said, you're not your hat collection, so never think bad of yourself or think bad of others because of the hats that they have. That's just silly. I feel like sometimes that people do that. I don't think that is very divisive. I think sharing our hats with each other should be a part of our evolution as a person, right? So maybe you learned something like yesterday, Morgan. You told me that besides you telling me that you're 19, you told me that McGill is the source. All right, we know that McGill is the source of KTG hats for their felts. But I didn't know yesterday was that McGill also supplies Bellissimo, in New York City with their felts. Again, that's me learning something as a 50-year-old. And I know some people think that, some people get into this world once they get to become a teenager. They think they know everything there is to know about everything. I know this only because I was a teenager once. I raised a teenager, it's just one of those fallacies because I don't know. Maybe it's that dark side of fake it till you make it. Teenagers just have anybody that's like been a teenager or has raised a teenager will know that frustration that you get when they reach to about the teenagers. That's usually right in high school or right before high school, where one, everything you say is uncool, and two, you don't know what you're talking about because everything was different than when you grew up. And it's true, things were different when I grew up, but certain things stay the same, right? Some things don't change. That's the old adage that history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. So I think there's a lot of truth in that. And sometimes you can benefit from that, right? So like if you have access to an older person, and even if you don't, now you do, because I consider myself an older person. I'm probably the oldest person here, up until maybe Paul gets in, because Paul's older than me. Paul's got about 15 plus years on me. So until Paul comes in, but when Paul comes in, now you got two old people here to tell you stuff. And Ian, I don't know how old you are. It doesn't matter. You don't need to share that. I think of Ian as a younger person only because he's out there in the band, but there are older people in bands. I think it's cool that we have a musician here. So we got a hat maker and a musician, and we got two New Yorkers. So we got two folks from the UK. Morgan, you don't need to share what you do. And that's fine. You're 19. You may not like do anything yet. I don't know. I know when I was 19, I didn't do anything other than like have graduated high school. And I think I started college at 19. But yeah, you got a hat maker from the UK. We got, a musician from London. And I'm a researcher from the greater DC area that grew up in New York City. This is what's beautiful about the internet and about YouTube, is that now we have folks that have similarities and that we all love hats, but we are coming at it from different backgrounds, and I love that because one, I want to travel everywhere. I've not been to the UK yet. I want to, and I will do it, especially because I know that the UK is a source of so much tradition in the hat community. Yesterday, we talked about the tradition that came from, originated in Czechoslovakia, and then had influence on, Italy with Borsellino. It had influence on the UK, right? Because Tonak supplied Borsellino. They supplied Christie's, in the UK, and they also supplied, Selco hats, Selco hats in Brooklyn, and that became the basis of Celentino in the 90s. So yeah. So Ian says, I'm no spring chicken. That's okay. Because probably doing music keeps you young, right? I think so. I think doing what you love keeps you young, right? And young is only like a mindset, right? I got to tell you, I mean, I got the two 7-year-olds that I hung out with on on Sunday morning. Excuse me, I'm a little hoarse. I mentioned this earlier in the stream. I'm hoarse because I was screaming my lungs out last night, cheering on my New York Mets as they beat the Washington Nationals, and I got to hang out with my son and his girlfriend. So shout out to them. I had a great time last night. At Nationals Park in Washington D.C. Great park, great atmosphere. Lots of Mets fans there besides myself and my son. Yeah, that's why I'm a little bit. I didn't even know if I was gonna make it yesterday. I got in just before midnight. I think I strolled into the house just before midnight. My cat was like, "Where have you been?" Oliver was like, "You got some splaining to do, young man." So my cat is just one of those things where I'm like, "Oh, geez, you got here just in time. I was about to eat my foot." Oliver is just like he's like the cat version of me in that he is forever hungry, even if he just ate. Sorry, now I'm getting a little bit of the. I'm gonna take a little bit of sip of this. Oliver is like one of those like forever hungry cats. And because he has such a cute face, remember he's a former feral. I don't think he knows any of his boundaries in terms of how much he needs to eat. And I feel like I'm very much like that. But anyway, back to the task, the topic at hand. You know, I just want this channel to be a exchange. Nobody needs to talk about themselves. Sometimes, there are details that I probably won't talk about my life. But I try to be open book, kind of an open book, because I want people to kind of know where I'm coming from, and they can kind of hopefully that will help them understand a little bit about what I'm about. I talked about like my formal training. My formal schooling is in organizational psychology. And that kind of was what brought me to the DC area from New York City, is that I went out here and attended graduate school to study organizational psychology, and then essentially got a job right away in the DC area. And well, that became of it. Like my family came over with me. The plan really wasn't to stay in the DC area. The plan was to go to school here, graduate, and go back to New York. Because again, I didn't know, I didn't really experience a lot of life outside of New York City. I had a bias. Now, I did attend college in Florida for like a year and a half, and I was homesick. I was in Orlando, Florida for about a year and a half. It was nice to leave New York for a little bit, but I missed home so badly that I went and I transferred back, and I went to college in Queens, to finish my undergraduate. And yeah, that's how I kind of got into, like, my son followed, I found out I was going to be a dad, like right in the middle of my college years, right? And I was a little lost. But once I knew my son was going to come along, I kind of got my act together. I started like pressing to make sure I got all my classes done. I started worrying a lot more about like what's going to happen after undergraduate. And luckily things worked out where I was able to get into a research program. And then I did an internship, right? So between my junior and senior years, credit wise, in college in New York, I had an internship in Baltimore. And this is so funny that this ties into my hat of the day. I did an internship in Baltimore. So I spent the summer in Baltimore, working for a research lab, right? To shout out to the National Institute on Aging in Baltimore, Maryland. It's located right near Johns Hopkins Hospital, which is one of the premier hospitals in all of the U.S. So if you don't know Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, just know that it is a tremendously well-regarded facility in Baltimore. And in that summer in Baltimore made me love Baltimore. I still go back now. Now I live a little closer to Baltimore, right? I'm about an hour away, more or less, depending on traffic from Baltimore. I try to get out there, as often as I can, because one, I love Fells Point. I just have great memories as a 20-something year old, in my early 20s, of going to Phil's Point, and meeting new people, and just experiencing Baltimore from a different lens, right? I think Baltimore has a reputation of being a tough city, and it is a tough city, just like Washington D.C. is, just like New York City is, just like Philadelphia is, just like Chicago, just like L.A., just like a lot of urban, Miami, a lot of urban areas. But Baltimore has it occupies a very special place in my heart, because I just had some great memories. People that probably are familiar with Baltimore through television are familiar with the TV series The Wire, which took place in Baltimore. Obviously, kind of a gritty show, and showed some of the gang life, and drug life in Baltimore, and that it does exist and it still exists. But Baltimore is so much more to me, than that. I mean, it's a great series. You guys know I'm a big fan of those kind of gritty television and movies. But Baltimore, is just so special. So if you haven't had a chance to visit Baltimore, check out Fells Point, check out the aquarium, right? The Inner Harbor. But Fells Point is a cool place just to walk around. And if you want a recommendation, there's probably two places I'd recommend in Fells Point. One is a place that I spent a lot of time in. It's actually a lot fancier now. It was a dog bar called Cooper's. Cooper's with a K. It's a dog bar, so you can bring your dog. As far as I know, it was a dog bar and it still is. Great crab dip. Try the crab dip. If you go to Baltimore, try crab cakes or crab dip. You're not gonna regret it. Trust me. Another place is even an older bar called. It's more of a dive bar. Yeah, The Wire was excellent. I even read the book. I didn't even know it was a book. Wow, Ian. I mean, I just learned something. I'm not really an avid reader, but I want to be. I'm a little bit. I don't know. I have a little bit of like. I think I'm a little ADHD without never having been diagnosed. I just feel like books. I do better with more visual content with like movies and TV. And that's also a function of the fact that of how I grew up. Uh, but I have read a few books. I didn't even know The Wire was a book series. Thanks for sharing that. But yeah, it's shout out to Baltimore. And it's funny that I mentioned Baltimore because, well, this hat has ties to Baltimore. So I don't know. I got to think. This is a hat brand, right? That probably some folks know some of the name and the connection. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the hat journey that I went with this hat, right? So this was a hat. Uh, oh my gosh, I'm gonna probably butcher some of these details, right? But you guys know some of my stories that I've told already about hats. Is that sometimes I get them through a private sale, and sometimes I get them through through a thrift shop. But sometimes I get them both, right? Like I'll go buy a hat someplace far away from, farther away from my home. And then what'll happen is I'll get the hat and then I'll go visit a thrift shop or something like that and maybe get another hat. And I think that's what happened with this hat. So if you guys remember a couple shows ago, I profiled my Berg's Lord's hat, my Lord's hat by Berg, a great hat, occupies a very special place in my collection because, well, one, I didn't even know what a Lord's hat was until I got that Berg. I thought I was buying a Hamburg. And by all definitions, sometimes I look at it, I'm like, wow, it's like that hat. I didn't know what I was getting when I bought that hat. I bought that hat privately from a lady in, I want to say it was right outside of Baltimore. I think it was, oh, wow. It was near Easton, Maryland, somewhere between DC and Baltimore. I met up with the lady. I bought the Berg's Lord's hat, and I was happy as a clam because I thought I got this great cognac colored Hamburg that looked like it was never worn. Like it literally had like, so when you see if you see the hat and I don't know if I shared any photos of the inside of the hat when I did the series. If I come back again and I wear it on a different stream, maybe I will share photos of the inside of it. But by all means, when I got the hat, it was pristine. It looked like it never touched anybody's head. So I was happy as a clam. It actually was a hat that fit me, and it just was one of those hats. Like, and then when I got it back, I didn't know what I had. Right, I didn't know what I was like. It opened me up to the idea of the Lord's hat and also the brand Berg. Right, so this was like a lightning striking twice. Right, because right, like I was alluding to before, once I made that purchase, what I did was I pulled out my cell phone and I mapped local thrift shops. So I just saw, I was like, okay, I'm in this area already. I got this hat, right? That's allocated. I had it in my car. And I'm like, okay, let me go see what the local thrift stores are about, only because you never know what kind of jewels you'll find, right? And sure enough, I think it was like the last thrift shop that I had on my maps. And I forget where it was located, because again, I just was randomly picking out, okay, what are the nearest thrift shops that are on my way home? Because I was heading back south. And the very last thrift shop, right, on that trip, after I already had the Berg in the bag, right? I had the Berg in the bag. I was already happy. But the last thrift shop that I went to, I saw this hat. And I'm like, okay, they had a bunch of like, let's just call them cheap hats. They were not like fine hats per se. But what they did was they had several fine felt hats behind the counter. And luckily, I saw it at the corner of my eye, and I was like, okay, that's got promise, right? So I went. Once it was my turn to go to the counter. I went and I saw this hat, and I look at the hat. I'm looking at the hat, right, and I'm like, I've never heard of this brand. All I saw, right, when I examined the hat was His Excellency, and then I saw University, I believe, right? So that's where I'm going to go. I'm going to actually share, right, because I'm. This is kind of like I've gotten used to sharing photos, right? Only because one, if you guys have seen me without my hat on, you guys already know that my hat's a wreck. Like my hair's a wreck underneath. So I'm going to stop taking my hat off. And I'm going to go and show you photos, because one, you'll see the hat better. And two, I don't have to show my bed head, my hair. So it serves two functions. So I'm going to share my screen again, just as tradition. You guys can let me know. I think yesterday the photos weren't coming through, but hopefully it does now. And you guys can let me know if the photos come through. Let's see if I can choose the right one. Let's see if this works. Are you guys seeing the photos on your end? I just want to make sure, because again, sometimes this doesn't come through. Again, I'm kind of tech in that respect. Yes, perfect. Thank you, Ian. Okay, so you can see here, this is what I kind of good. Again, this is when I got home and I snapped some photos. You can kind of see, by all means, this is not a remarkable looking hat, right? I think it's like a brown, but depending on the light, the brown takes a different hue, right? So like here it looks brown, but like certain times, and depending on the light and how it shines on the hat, it looks like a burgundy almost. I wore this blue because I think hopefully it'll contrast the hat, because it is, I think the formal color is brown, so I think blue and brown kind of look sharp together. I don't know. You may have a different opinion, but this is what I was looking at. And I'm like, okay, I still don't know what this little hook is. My guess is that this hook is functional and not decorative. I think it looks sharp, because this is a plain looking stingy brim hat, right? It has a really thick bow, right? A really thick band on the hat. So I like that already. And this, I mean, again, I think it's just there because maybe the band broke, and then somebody put this to kind of keep it together. That's the only thing I could tell you in terms of without knowing what I'm looking at here. And I obviously, because I don't like fiddling with my hat, one, I think it looks good. Yeah, stingy brim with a nice wide ribbon. Yeah, agreed. That's what caught my eye, right? We always talk about when we see a hat either on a website or in person, um, and what have you, and whatever other way we see a hat, when you know like something grabs you, you're like, okay, this already looks good. I'm already getting the feels, right? Like the kids like to say, I'm already getting the feels from this hat. So I'm looking at the hat, and obviously I'll show you what I saw next, which is when I flipped it upside down, and I'm like, okay, this doesn't photograph very well. This is a photograph that I took because, well, one, it's crappy. But the other thing is because it has the combination of the color, right, which I liked, right? This is a hat lining that has something that pops, right? I showed a Mallory with like I had a Mallory Fifth Avenue that I profiled that had the jump wings, and it had a really trippy liner. This one was a really sharp kind of, I don't want to say burgundy type, red burgundy type hue, and it had a hat, the plastic hat tip liner, which is kind of like, I'm already getting like, so at that point in my hat journey, I already know, okay, this is given what I'm seeing, a stingy brim. It has the hat tip liner. This is a hat from like the late 50s, early 60s to me, without knowing anything about the brand, right? You look, so I'll show you another photo. That way that this one might come out a little bit better. So you can see in this angle, I kind of got a little bit more of a better shot of the model, right? So I'm like, His Excellency. I never heard of that hat brand, Um, you know, I had no idea what I had here. All I knew is I liked it, right? I didn't care. I mean, I know a lot of folks are very brand loyal, and I just got away from that because it, like when you see something that catches your eye, I don't care whose brand it is. It could be the cheapest thing in the world, but if it makes me feel good and like I said, I get the feels, I'm gonna buy it, as long as it's not outrageously priced. And this hat was not outrageously priced when when I saw the price. So I'm examining the hat. This is what I'm kind of looking at, because these are photos that I took right as I got home, which if you know me by now, you know that's like my MO. So I'm looking and I'm like, okay, I'm examining. That's a nice color liner. Thank you, Morgan. I think it's really sharp, and it's different. Regardless of your taste. Like I know some people might look at that lining and say that's atrocious. I would never wear that. Even though that you don't look at it. But for me, I mean, I saw this, and everything I gathered to that point said to me that this is a hat I want to own. Like, didn't care. So I'm like, okay, I don't know this hat brand. I'll find out what I can find out, right? Because I'm a researcher by trade. So I'm like, I already like this hat, so I don't care what I'm gonna uncover. It can only be uphill from here, is what I told myself, And and I wonder, like, this is the thing I'm gonna ask. I'll ask of everybody that watches this video, not just you guys that are here on live, but have you guys had something similar, like when you've seen a hat, right? Do you ever see a hat that you kind of knew, like maybe you didn't even know, right? So I know Morgan's a fan of Stetson, and that she's really big on Stetson. I love Stetson too, like a lot of people do, because it's just a great hat brand. So besides, have you ever run into a hat that you didn't know anything about, but you knew you had to have it? Um, like it just seems like that's a little bit something that I don't always get, because I feel like I like in doing research on the Fedora Lounge and doing like seeing other people's collections on Facebook. I feel like I've seen a lot of hat brands by now, and it seems rarer now that I'll come across a hat brand that I don't know. At least I don't know something. At least like I know that brand. This was that one of those times, right? Berg was another one, that I just didn't know much about. I kind of started learning after the fact. Ian says, I have a real similar hat, same color. Liner says exclusive, Imperial, Duval, New York. Okay. Well, now you just told me something, Ian, that I just got, I never heard of that. But it doesn't mean that, now I'll probably be a lot more inclined to kind of look that up to find out. Like again, if I ran across a hat that said exclusive Imperial Duval, New York, unless it was something that I knew I was never going to wear, I'd probably not, I'd probably buy it. Like I said, I don't like, one of my themes is I try not to buy anything that I know won't fit me and that I'm not going to ever wear. Right. I just, again, because I run across so many hats, I have to provide some kind of theme. It's not a very hard and fast theme, but some parameters around what I'm willing to pony up money for, right? So price is going to be one of them. But the other thing um, am I going to realistically wear this hat? And if the answer is no, unless something else really like says, okay, I just need to see this. I'm never going to wear it, but I really need to own this hat. I won't buy it. Because again, I just run across, even though hats are, there's some rarity in hats. I just find there's so many hats out there that I come across that I can afford to be a little choosy. It's like, whatever. If I don't buy it, somebody else is going to buy it and they're going to love it even more than I do. So I don't feel like I need to buy every single hat that I come across. I can admire it. I can go see it, admire it, feel it in my hand if I'm there in person. But then I can say thanks, but no thanks. I don't need to see that. This was not one of those. Obviously, I took this home right away. And again, that was one trip. I went to this area of Maryland that's like over an hour away or about an hour away. And I made so essentially a round trip of 2 hours. So I said, okay, I'm in this area that I'm never gonna probably be again for at least a long time. Let me check out the local shops. And then I got a BOGO, like, no, not a BOGO, because I didn't get it for free. But I got kind of like a twofer, right? So I went and got there. I made the trip to get the Berg, and I came home with two hats that I really, really loved. And again, two hats that I really didn't know what I had, right? So I'll get into a little bit more of that in a second. But here's the rest of the liners. So it tells me that, okay, this is His Excellency, and it's a university model, right? So I'll cue in there. It's been really like the hat wasn't like unworn. Like it definitely looked like it was worn before. Didn't matter one bit to me. But the Berg was unworn. So I'm like, okay, this hat's worn. But like it looks still in really good shape. So you can see the university and the rest of the sweatband was in really good shape. But what do we know? Like, what could I tell about the hat in knowing the hat? Like at that point, I knew because it was a stingy brim and it had that plastic tip liner. The other thing it had was a black sweatband, right? So like at some point in the decline of hat wear post World War II, we started seeing like less brown sweatbands, right? So these leather sweatbands, the use of brown sweatbands like dropped. Maybe it was cheaper to make black sweatbands. I don't know the answer to that. All I know is that it's widely known that the proliferation of the color of your leather sweatband, there was a shift there from the 40s, after the 40s, like after World War II, and you started seeing more of these black sweatbands. And my guess is that they were cheaper to produce. So that hat companies started struggling as people started wearing hats in fewer numbers after World War II, right? We talked about that ad nauseum, that decline of hat wear in the US, and Ian and Paul, I think, corroborated that it happened the same way out in the UK, that we had an unparalleled economic prosperity after World War II, and that gave rise to access to the automobile. So now hat companies are struggling, right? Because they're like, oh my gosh, now we have to compete. There's a lot more competition, and people are opting not to buy our hats. So how do we go and still make a profit? We have to cut some corners. And then we also have to evolve the style, right? To meet the demand of the hat community that still was purchasing hats. So now you started seeing the proliferation of the stingy brim, right? You started seeing the lowering of the crown height. And then you also started seeing the decline of the brown sweatband. I think it still existed, but companies were opting to kind of come out with this black sweatband, which I don't know what the other benefits might have been. It could have just been strictly a cost-cutting measure. Somebody that knows more, that sees this video later on, could kind of maybe opine on that. I'm just making up a story in my mind because in my mind it makes sense. But what you saw was a decline. Also, your president stopped wearing hats. Exactly. Great point, Ian. That's something I talked about. The Kennedy administration, John F. Kennedy, sorry, Robert F. Kennedy was his brother. Sorry, Robert Kennedy. But John F. Kennedy, who was elected president, I believe in 1960, was the first the first president that opted to forego hats, right? So everybody kind of remembers Truman, FDR, all the presidents prior to Kennedy. Eisenhower, right? I think Eisenhower was the president right before John F. Kennedy, and Ike. Ike wore a hat. I think Ike favored the Homburg as well. So what you saw is that no longer was the president going to be seen when he's meeting with other world leaders in, obviously Winston Churchill was another prominent wearer of the Homburg. But up until Kennedy, you saw your major leader, and it was your knowledge of presidents is impressive, Luke. Thank you, Morgan. I don't claim, like I said, I don't claim to be an expert on anything. I am kind of just a nerd, history nerd, a junior nerd, because there's so many people that know more. They've forgotten more than I've ever learned in my whole life, and I want to respect those folks because they're true historians. And me, I'm just somebody that, like, I get a bug in my bonnet, for lack of a better term, about like wanting to know. Right, I'm a researcher by trade. In training, and I will go back and I'll try to piece together the history of things. And Eisenhower just happens to be one of those iconic presidents. Obviously, FDR and Truman as well. But they're iconic presidents that were like, you wouldn't see them without a hat, right? So they were kind of, I want to say they were the Homburg era of presidents. Before that was kind of like the top hat era. And I just don't know when that shifted, but somebody else would probably know that. Eisenhower is my favorite Republican president. Yeah, I like Ike, right? I think the term "I like Ike," and I'm glad that you mentioned that, Morgan. It's really nice to see a young person appreciate history, and because again, I remember he or she that doesn't study history is doomed to repeat it. There is that kind of notion there. Looks like somebody's trying to reach me. Sorry about that. Interesting. We say "bee in the bonnet." Oh wow, Ian, that's awesome. Yeah. That's interesting. I did not know that. I've always heard bug in the bonnet. Obviously, I think that maybe that's just kind of something that's originated in the UK, only because bonnet is not a word that we typically use, at least not in modern iterations, right? Do you guys say bonnet in London still? Like we say trunk out here in the US, right? Kind of like that whole thing of like, anyway, I'm not gonna. I was gonna make a reference to junk in the trunk, but yeah, that's something else that that's referring to. But yeah, we don't say we say trunk here, but bonnet, maybe bonnet is what is originated in the UK. So again, somebody else who knows would probably know exactly what the origination of that phrase. I've always heard bug in the bonnet, um, uh, but yeah, uh, that's something I definitely probably will end up looking up if I remember it. But yeah, thank you. This is what I. These are the things that I love. The regionality of language. Yeah, Ian says the same thing. I like languages. No, bonnet is archaic, but sayings often are. Yeah, yeah. It's just funny how certain things, get are regionalized, right? So the for me, like, I kind of get a kick out of like the regionalization here in the U.S., right? So obviously, outside the U.S., you kind of have phrases that people outside of the U.S. know as a U.S. phrasing, but when you're here living in the U.S., you kind of know that there's certain regionality of language, right? One thing is the water fountain, right? So, Morgan, you probably know about the water fountain, right? It's where you go and get a drink of water, right? But in the U.S., there is a little nuance of the water fountain. So I grew up in New York, as did Morgan, and we said water fountain, right? I'm going to get a drink of water from the water fountain, and when I got into college and I got into the workforce after college, I started meeting folks from like the Wisconsin area, right? So people that grew up in around Milwaukee, Wisconsin, um, and and I heard the term bubbler. So it's a water fountain, but in Wisconsin, it's known as the bubbler. So isn't that like interesting? You still say water with a New York accent. Hey, some things never die, right? You could take the boy out of Brooklyn, but you can't take the Brooklyn out of the boy sometimes. Even though I've been living in the DC metro area for probably longer than I've lived in New York now, right? So I moved out here right before 9/11. And so I've been here close to 25 years. So far longer than I've lived in New York even. So I'm probably considered a local and by now. But yeah, some things out even right. There's a lot of New Yorkers here in the DC area, right? We have a very transient area, and we get a lot of New Yorkers. And some folks will call out. It's like, if they're not from here, they're like, "Are you from New York?" You get a lot of folks from Pittsburgh here. You get a lot of folks from Philly, Baltimore, all over the place, because obviously the federal government is a big staple here. So we get a lot of transients. Ian says Americans switch from old-fashioned English to jive talk in one sentence often. Albion's Seed is a great book that considers where American accents came from. Yeah, yeah. Let me share another historical basis, right? So, growing up, right? So, I talked about this early in the stream. So, like that might have been right before you guys joined, but I was doing my monologue, while I was waiting for folks to join in. But I talked about like my history growing up, right? So, like my evolution in terms of being exposed to different cultures, it really started in high school, right? So like if you kind of grew up in a New York City public school system like I did in the 80s, you kind of knew, and this is very similar in other areas, especially other urban areas like Brooklyn. You kind of you kind of knew what elementary school you were going to go to, right? Because it was based on your geographic location, on your neighborhood, right? And then you fed into a junior high school, right? A junior high school, so it was like several elementary schools scattered that fed into a smaller pyramid, right? Usually they're called school pyramids. So you start off with a bunch of elementary schools that will feed into a smaller number of junior high schools, right? So all of a sudden, when you get to junior high school, you start meeting new kids that went to another elementary school. You'll see a lot of your kids that you went to elementary school with, but now you're going to be introduced to kids from other elementary schools. And kind of when like sixth grade for me was like that first year of junior high school, or middle school, some people refer to. And then you kind of know, like that first year, you just stick to your own, like, right? You stick to your own elementary school kids, because you don't know these other kids, right? We didn't have the internet back then. So like now, like when my son grew up, he had smartphones, so he knew kids from other schools because they were connecting on Instagram and Snapchat and all these other things that came out way after me. But we didn't know kids from other elementary schools because they weren't from our neighborhood, right? So we were very, like, I want to say, for lack of a better term, like landlocked, right? Like we were lived in our own little bubble of our own neighborhood, and you didn't go out to another neighborhood, even if it was like a neighborhood a few blocks down. Like you kind of knew where your limits were, right? You didn't want to go to another neighborhood because you were going to run into somebody that didn't know you. They're going to ask you, "What are you doing here?" And then sometimes you have to kind of like you have to kind of get in, you have to like avoid trouble. Usually I avoided trouble and I didn't try to get into a fight. But ultimately, like if you couldn't get out of trouble, then maybe you have to fight your way back into your neighborhood. And I know that's kind of weird for some people growing up. Like they didn't grow up that way. I know my son didn't grow up that way. My son grew up here, even though he was born in New York City. Like we moved out to Northern Virginia, like really early. I think he was 2 when we came out here. So he didn't know that, but like me growing up in Brooklyn in the 80s and heading into the early 90s, you still were like, you stuck in your own neighborhood only because if you went like, if you don't know about that, then you can watch it in like The Warriors, right? There's a very good movie that came out, I believe in the 70s or 80s, that talks about gang culture in New York City. It's called The Warriors. It's a very iconic movie. Again, I'm not doing this to glorify gang culture. It's just do it because it's something that I knew, that I grew up, like it was surrounded by it, and even though I wasn't in a gang, we had what was called, we had gangs in New York City, but when I was growing up, but they were more often crews, right? We didn't call them gangs, we called them crews. And what they were, I mentioned this early in the stream, they were just groups of friends that got together and kind of like agreed that we were going to watch each other's backs, right? So like when somebody from another neighborhood came in, that we weren't going to let them, beat us up and maybe rob us, right? And it was a little more organized, right? So it wasn't a gang because there were only like a few of us. But all we were just a group of friends. Sometimes we like wore the same colors, right? We didn't wear hats, but we had like what was called beads, right? We had colored beads, and every crew decided, like, right, it was only a few kids, so they were like, okay, what are going to be our colors? Maybe we'll have a name, right? So we had, I just remember that there was a group that was very close, like, that my older brothers were affiliated with, that were called the Parkside Boys. So PSB, I guess, were their acronyms, and they wore different beads. I forgot what their colors were, but it's just something that they were not a gang, they were a crew. And all it was is that it was just a group of friends that hung out together, and just agreed that if ever the time called upon it, we just get together to make sure that we weren't going to chased out of our own neighborhood, right? Ian says, I recorded an album in Manhattan some years ago. I really like New York. Yeah, New York. Okay, so this is something that somebody that I knew that spent a lot of time in London and spent a lot of time in Berlin, in Germany, and also in Switzerland. This gentleman told me that he loved New York because New York has a very European vibe. And I didn't know that growing up, right? So I didn't know that what I was looking at and what I was experiencing in New York was very European, because I never stepped foot in Europe, right? I just recently, like, I'm very young in world travel. So I just recently went to Europe for the first time a few years ago. And I haven't made it out to Germany yet, but I will. I haven't made it out to the UK yet, but I will. And Switzerland, definitely, because I love watches, So I'm like, I'm going to Switzerland one day because I want to see the birthplace of watches that I really love, right? So this happens to be, I mean, not that anybody cares, this happens to be a Longines. And Longines is owned by a conglomerate called Swatch, right? Everybody knows Swatch, and Swatch is a brand, but Swatch is a brand that's kind of like known for like their disposable watches, right? But Swatch is more than a brand. Swatch is a conglomerate that owns brands like Omega. They own Longines. They own Hamilton. They own gosh, there's a whole list. Rado is a Swatch conglomerate brand. There's many more brands that I can't even come up with, but Omega's probably like the top brand, and Longines is up there as well. But this is a kind of a family heirloom. And just in case if somebody's a watch nerd, this watch is from 1951. Is known as a Longines square tank model, and it's 26 millimeters, so it's a really tiny watch. But I love this watch. It actually was handed to me by a member of my family, and and it holds a lot of value to me sentimentally. And actually, I think actually I've been offered like $1,000 for this watch, but I'm not selling this. Like I'm like, thank you, but no thank you. There's no way I'm gonna sell this a family heirloom for 1,000 or even 10,000 or even $100,000. I mean, I don't, I just happen to like not need that much money anyway. I'm tickled that somebody's interested in the watch, but I'm like, no, like I'd be selling my like you about to ask me to buy a member of my family. I just will never do it. I'm hoping that this stays in the family for for forever. I don't think my son is really into watches. He just, watch wearing is another subculture that, because of the rise of the smartphone, and even smartphones are gonna like go away, is what I'm hearing. People are talking about the about tattoos and the smart glasses now more than ever. Ian says, I sport a pocket watch these days. That's what the small pocket in the jeans is for. That's right. That's right. Shout out to my pocket watch wearers. I'm not one of them, but I love watches in all forms, right? Including the grandfather clock, including the pocket watch. I love all forms of watches, even the smartwatch. Even though I don't own a smartwatch and probably never will, I do respect it because it is kind of just an evolution of the standard time wear, right? The concept of time, the reason why, and I'll talk about this just a little bit, right? I know I got off on a tangent here from the hat, but the reason why watches hold such a significance, I think, and I'm speaking for myself, but I'm going to try to speak for watch nerds as well, even though I consider myself a junior watch nerd, is just the idea of, okay, it's a piece of machinery, right? So we know that just like hats, guys kind of have this thing for cards and machines, but there's such a like connection that one feels to like a mechanical watch, right? So quartz, I have quartz watches. No offense to quartz, I inherited. So in addition to this mechanical Longines watch, I also inherited some quartz watches, which I still love and near and dear. I'll never sell. They're not expensive watches. They're Timex usually. Timex is a really respected brand, especially with the quartz. But I'm a big fan of the mechanical watch, especially the automatic mechanical watch. This just happens to be a hand wind, a hand wound mechanical watch. So I have to wind it twice a day, but it still tells tremendous time. Like I don't think I've ever need to service this watch. Yeah, Ian, mine as well. Yep. Mine needs winding daily. Yeah. Sometimes what I'll do is I will try to break up my day into two portions. Like when I get up in the morning, I'll wind it up, and then sometime midday, so sometime between, I don't know, sometime before bedtime, I guess. So I'll get up in the day, and sometime before night, I'll wind it. And I think I usually can get away with this watch with just winding it twice. Sometimes only because it's a habit. It's kind of like smoking. If I don't find anything to do, or maybe I'm a little nervous and I'm a little fidgety, right? I'll take the watch off, and then I'll hand wind it a little bit just to kind of it's therapeutic, right? It's kind of like steaming a hat. It's a little bit therapeutic, to be honest, And I mentioned this early on. I'm kind of a little bit ADHD, if you haven't been able to tell. I've never been diagnosed with ADHD, but I feel like I have all the symptoms of somebody with ADHD. And I think some of the fidgeting, right? Everybody knows about fidget spinners, and you'll know somebody with ADHD because they're very fidgety and they're very twitchy, right? I'm gonna call it twitchy. I even speak twitchy. So if anybody's annoyed by that, hopefully you guys will forgive me. I think besides being like very New Yorky, So it's going to be a new thing that I'm just going to come up with, New Yorkie. Uh, uh, I'm New Yorkie and I'm twitchy in my speech and in my actions. So hopefully that's not a distractor for anybody. But if it is, I apologize preemptively. But anyway, watches, love watches. I don't have a huge watch collection. That's not the purpose of this channel. I'm really here to talk about hats with my fellow hat nerds, but I'm glad to see there's overlap. I think there's a lot of overlap in the fine hat and watch community. So I think that's something that if somebody says, hey, talk a little bit about your watch, I mean, I'm happy to do that. I don't really know a lot more than I already shared about this particular watch. Other than like the family background that I have, that I could talk about. I probably won't, only because, there's certain details I'll probably want to keep private. But just so you know, this watch has a lot of significance for me because of where it came from. And the person that wore this watch is very near and dear for me. The people that know me very well probably know, like really well, know those details, but otherwise I'll keep that detail private. But anyway, back to the hat. So you guys saw some of the things that got me. Then came one of my favorite portions of hat ownership is when I find out and I do a little research and just to find out what I have on my hand, right? So you guys know where this is going, right? This is going to Fedora Lounge, right? I go back and just like usual, I will post my new hats, in what hat am I wearing? Usually because when I get a hat, I'm always wearing it. So I will find my way to the Fedora Lounge first, and I will take photos. Like this was probably one of the photos I posted, and I'll share it with my fellow hat nerd on what hat are you wearing today in that thread, right? So again, if you didn't hear this before, but I used to post as on Fedora Lounge as Crown Royal, and then when I got the idea of this channel, I went and I got the moderators on the Fedora Lounge to approve my switching my screen name to Good Lukes. So now you can find me on the Fedora Lounge posting as Good Lukes. But if you happen to see something about Crown Royal, that is me as well. Again, I don't post as often as some of the other regulars on the Fedora Lounge. But if you really want to learn about hats more than you could ever learn on this channel, shout out to the Fedora Lounge and my Fedora Loungers or my Fedora Lounge Lizards, because I learned and I still learning so much from you guys every day. Shout out to you guys. If you are listening to this, now or in syndication, love the Fedora Lounge. Really, really big shout out. Also, Facebook groups, Hats and Guitars in particular. The Hatters Lounge. I'm an admin on the Hatters Lounge. It's a much smaller community. I think we only have like 70 something members, but I'm an admin there. You can find me there amongst a lot of other Facebook groups. But anyway, into the research, basically, His Excellency. That's what I typed into the Fedora Lounge, and I said, okay, who's got something? Who's got a hat by this brand? Maybe I can learn, right? So when I typed in I think maybe His Excellency wasn't maybe I just typed Excellency. As soon as I typed that into the Fedora Lounge, I came upon a thread on a hat brand called Dalton, Dalton. And Dalton was, I had never heard of Dalton either up until that point. But what I quickly learned, and there was a thread called Going Atomic with Dalton. And when I went through that thread and I researched the thread, what I learned was a couple things. One, what I learned was that Dalton was a hat brand that existed in New York. They were based out of Yonkers, New York. Shout out to my folks from Yonkers. Yonkers is a very, very interesting town. I don't think I spent a lot of time in Yonkers, but people from New York know about Yonkers, especially the folks that are more on the Bronx side. So if you grew up living in the Bronx, you probably had a lot of ties to Yonkers. I could talk a little bit more about Yonkers, but I won't. Essentially, I found out that there's got to be some tie because Dalton had a hat line called His Excellency. And I'm like, okay, these have to be connected. I don't know how, but they have to be connected. And then I started uncovering, and then basically I just went in order to kind of avoid like having to reconnect with and reread everything from the Fedora launch. What I did was I went to Chat GPT. Shout out to Chat GPT because it's really useful, especially if you want to research stuff. Because Chat GPT will pull things from places like the Fedora Lounge. So when you want to find out about uh, things that you don't know about, you could try Chat GPT and put in about fine hats in a certain brand or certain anything you want to know, and it will pull things from the Fedora Lounge. And that's what I did. I went and I pulled this from when I talked about tell me everything you know about Dalton hats, and you can see the references that it cited here, right? Hopefully, you guys are able to read this at this level, but hopefully, if you guys can't, I will blow this up. If you guys can't read it, you let me know. But it says here, community insights and collector appreciation about Dalton hats. It said the Fedora Lounge, a hat enthusiast forum, recounts that Dalton hats are rare and highly regarded by collectors. One user highlighted receiving a vintage Dalton hat. It has a very thick and dense felt. I would rate it as high as the Knox and Dobbs 20 hats. So that's a direct quote from somebody on the Fedora Lounge. It doesn't review who did it, who made the quote, but again, shout out to the Fedora Lounge. Another user added, they are very hard to locate. The company was located in Yonkers, New York. They closed shop in the late 1940s, I believe. Again, I don't know the veracity of that, but I'm going to take it as, okay, this company did exist up until the 1940s, and then we'll leave it at that. Now, here's an interesting thing, right? This third quote is from this one is cited from a user called Nebo. I'm going to say that, or Nebo or Nebo, right? Who is a descendant of the owner of Dalton hats. And he actually is a member of the Fedora Lounge. I don't know how often he posts. I don't see his post that often, but I did come across this post, and it's interesting that ChatGPT pulled this up. It says here, the same thread includes a fascinating note from Nebo, potentially a descendant. And the quote goes, the story goes that my ancestors lost out on a big military contract and then folded. There is mention in April 17th, 1952, that Herald Statesman from Yonkers that Harry Siegelbaum sold the company to Men's Hats of Baltimore, Maryland. So there you go. We had a quote. This goes right from a descendant of the Dalton family. I'm guessing the Dalton family, or maybe the Siegelbaum family, that stated that the company folded and why they folded, and that they eventually sold, right? So essentially, either it was a company owned by this Harry Siegelbaum, or it was eventually owned by Harry Siegelbaum, and he sold the company to Men's Hats of Baltimore, Maryland. So now you have a connection from New York to Baltimore. I was literally just talking about that I have a connection to Baltimore. So can you imagine, like, and I purchased this hat very close to Baltimore, right? The thrift shop that I went to was very close to Baltimore. So there you go. Like right then and there, I kind of like that blew my mind. So right then and there, I kind of said, okay, this is very obviously not a Dalton hat, right? But maybe, just maybe, given like the timeline, right? Remember I told you when I got the hat, I said, okay, based on the styling, based on the black sweatband, based on the plastic tip liner, this hat, right? Everything I know about the style of this hat kind of tells me that this is late 50s, early 60s. So that jives with this timeline. So you see, you just got to when you're into vintage hats, you're kind of like a mini detective, right? Like I like to think of myself like a mini Sherlock Holmes, except not that smart. Yeah, you have to be a detective because there's a lot. there's a lot you have to be comfortable with a little bit of the unknown, and being willing to like come up with a story to fill in the gaps. Um, and I just happen to love doing that because I'm a researcher by trade, right? That's what we do. A researcher in any kind of scientific field has to kind of use a little bit of evidence, right? They'll maybe run an experiment, or they'll do a survey, or whatever kind of researcher you are. And then they will have to go beyond the data to be able to come up with a story. Sometimes what happens is the story comes first, right? The story becomes your theory that you test out with data, right? And you see if the data supports your theory. And sometimes you start the other way, right? You have data, and then you don't have any other like theory. You have to come up with a theory based on the data, right? So it's iterative like that. Sometimes it's chicken and egg, and you don't know what came first. And then what it is it's a cycle. And you have to kind of you come up with a story, a hunch of what you think is going to be the story, and the data will either confirm or disconfirm bits or all of it, and then you refine your story or your theory, and then you go and you collect new data, and it becomes an iterative process. The same thing goes with hats. There's no difference with hats. Only that the data is usually coming from either the internet or other people who just happen to be alive, right? Or have some sort of connection. Like you could see 3 data points here that ChatGPT gave me. And some of these I saw before because I saw the thread when I saw them on the Fedora Lounge, but very nice that ChatGPT pulled out the information that I was looking for. So there you go. All you do is you try to triangulate based on all the evidence that you have with you to kind of tell the story of this hat. And that right there was enough to get me a clue as to where is this hat came from. So I already knew there that this is probably not a Dalton. This is kind of an iteration of His Excellency that came from Men's Hats of Baltimore, Maryland. And things just started coming together. And then I'll share another thing from ChatGPT. And then this one looks a little bit like I'm going to have to blow this up a little bit. And then when I asked, okay, maybe I went a little too big here. When I asked ChatGPT to tell me everything they knew about Men's Hats of Baltimore, it talked about, okay, it started with this company called MS Levy and Sons. I'm assuming it's Levy or Levy. But it says here, founded in the 1800s by Michael Simon Levy or Levy, this family-run business became renowned for its craftsmanship and quality. They specialized in straw and later wool felt hats, and at one point fabricated their own building at the Paca and Lombard streets to accommodate growth. Now, Lombard Street, I'm not sure about Paca, but Lombard Street is Baltimore. I know Lombard Street. I remember during my internship, that's Baltimore. And I saw Lombard, I'm like, okay, Baltimore for sure. And then here, let's see if I can go and go a little bit here and blow this up. That way you can see it, but I will read it. It says, Baltimore straw hat boom. Baltimore led the U.S. straw hat industry through the late 19th century and early 20th centuries. Innovations like the Mackinac, that's another term. So I'm not a big historian on the straw hats, but I have heard of the Mackinac, and maybe Ian or Morgan, if you guys have heard anything about the Mackinac, I do know that is a term in the straw hat nerds that exist on the Fedora Lounge. But again, that's well beyond my expertise. So I'm just going to leave it at that. But apparently, the Levy, what's it called? What did I call it? MS Levy and Sons were like leading the way for the straw hat community. So essentially they kind of had the Mackinac straw hat introduced around 1867. They were hot sellers, helping cement Baltimore's reputation as a major manufacturing center. So shout out to Baltimore again. By the 1870s, major players like MS Levy, Brigham Hopkins Company, and Towson Grace Company dominated the market with thousands of workers producing millions of hats annually by the 1920s. Love it. I didn't even know this. ChatGPT, like before I looked it up today, I didn't even know all this information. So shout out to ChatGPT. I know you're not a person, but Shout out to OpenAI and all the folks developing AI. I use it as a tool. I'm not scared about the future of AI. I'm just heartened because I use AI to help me become a bigger, even bigger hat nerd. And besides also using it for my day job. Anyway, decline over time. Like many U.S. manufacturing hubs, Baltimore's hat industry, especially straw hats, dwindled due to competition from mechanization, changing fashion trends, and economic shifts. So by the mid 20th century, the hat sector had shrunk significantly. So everybody, this is nothing we haven't already talked about. But what we know now is when Dalton ceased to become a figure, and they must have sold it in 1952 to Men's Hat Company in 1952, that around that April time. And then essentially Men's Hat Company was a conglomerate in and of itself, right? So we talked about the conglomerate of Hat Corporation of America, right? That had Dobbs, they had Kavanaugh, they had Berg, they had Dunlap, and a variety of other Knox. They had all these major hat brands. It looked like Men's Hat Company of Baltimore was trying to do the same thing, but based out of Baltimore, not New York. So shout out to Baltimore, shout out to New York for all being like these major hubs for the hat industry. So now I'm like, okay, now I get a little bit more about this hat. Now the hat becomes even better to me. And then of course I mentioned that I never, especially from my previous hats, if the sweatband's in good shape, I will pull that sweatband out and I will see what the tag says, because I know that's really useful for a lot of the Hat Corporation of America hats, vintage hats that I own. So I wanted to try it here. And then guess what? I got this photo. So hopefully this comes out and you can view this. But you can see right on that label, right underneath the lining. So when you pull the sweatband back on a vintage hat, you will probably see a label kind of like this. And it'll give you a little bit more clues about the hat model. It'll give you clues about maybe the date of when it was manufactured. Now, I don't have those clues like I have in terms of dates. Remember we talked about I knew about my Stetson based on the emblem of the logo, the roundel. I knew about some of the dates of my Hat Corporation of America hats from the labels, from this kind of label. I don't have enough information about Men's Hat Company to tell you intelligently about when this hat is made, but I can only assume that based on what we know that this hat was made. Now that we know, we can see the label. It says Men's Hats. So now what that tells me is that my hat came just kind of like I suspected. It must have been produced between 1953 and 1964 because that's when Men's Hat Company folded. So Men's Hat Company ceased to be an entity officially in 1964. So M.S. Levi or Levy, actually him and his family, they parted ways with the company in 1959, I believe it was. So again, I have I don't know. I know that exists as a time point, but I have nothing to tell me based on this label. But it doesn't mean that maybe in the future somebody goes and sees this label and will create, they're going to be, they will be the Men's Hat Company nerd or the Dalton nerd that will know exactly they'll create it because they'll research it because they'll be a better researcher than I am. And they will dig that much deeper because you can actually go, I rely on the internet, but you can actually, another source to rely on is newspapers. So shout out to my researchers especially on the Fedora Lounge, my fellow hat nerds that will go and will research microfiche, right? So if you go to the public library, especially the big ones, you can actually go and research newspaper articles that will give you more clues. And luckily, those hat nerds don't keep that knowledge to themselves. Usually what they'll do is they'll start a website. So I told you already about the hatitprofessor.com. I told you another one about publiusforum.com is where I found some of the Stetson information that I've posted on my previous cast. But we don't currently have a repository of information other than that hat that's called Going Atomic with Dalton on the Fedora Lounge. But it doesn't mean that it won't happen as these hats start getting uncovered. Who knows? Maybe it'll never get more proliferated than what we have now. Only because I've never seen. I know there's a lot of Dalton hats out there, but I've never seen another men's hat company hat right now. So right now, as far as I know, and there might be one other, right? In that thread, there's a gentleman that's known as the Lost Cowboy. His name is Nathan. He, I believe, might, and we haven't confirmed yet, he might have the only other men's hat company hat, but his definitely looks much older because he has the brown sweatband. It doesn't have Dalton written anywhere on it, but maybe, just maybe, he has something of a hybrid, right? He probably has a hat that existed between Dalton and between Men's Hat Company. So he might even have a third variant. We don't know yet because we haven't done the research yet. But maybe later on we'll uncover that mystery. So which hat does the Lost Cowboy have? He doesn't have a Dalton because he doesn't have Dalton anywhere in there. Or maybe he does. Maybe he just has a Dalton that doesn't have a name Dalton on it. But his says His Excellency, but it has the brown sweatband. So if it's a men's hat company, then it's something somewhere earlier on than my style of men's hat company hat, which is probably towards the later heyday of Men's Hat Company. Who knows? This is the fun of collecting vintage hats. And you kind of have to become a detective, and you have to kind of be uncomfortable not knowing everything. It's open and it's out there, and it's limited only by your curiosity. And so, yeah, so maybe later on I'll uncover more information. But up until now, this is all I know about this hat. And, it just is another story, another hat story, another Luke hat story that I'm sharing. And I don't always have like an elaborate story like this of hats. I probably shared the more elaborate ones already to begin with. But yeah, this is why I love this hobby. This is why I love hats to begin with. Let me go and stop sharing. So hopefully things won't blow up. But therein lies the story of my men's hat company of Baltimore, His Excellency model university, His Excellency University model from the late 50s, early 60s. And it's another connection I have to Baltimore. And it's a connection I have now to the Dalton Hat Company, which predated, His Excellency, right? So that brand was sold to the Men's Hat Company, which was now a conglomerate that was formed in 1939, headed by M.S. Levi or Levy, up until the early to mid 60s when they folded in like 64 or 60 or right around that time. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I'm coming up on 2 hours here live streaming. So it wasn't the 3 hours that I did yesterday, but hopefully every bit is enjoyable. Hopefully you enjoyed this as much as I did. Again, I'm going to say shout out to my moderator, Morgan Brown, for joining me again and contributing to the live stream. Also, another huge shout out to Ian Reed from London. Ian, thank you again for joining us. I appreciate your input. Thank you for coming back and sharing with us. And I'm going to close this out, given that I have nobody on here yet anymore. So this was Hat Chat number 14. Wow, we are already into the double digits. And I'm just going to try to keep this going. So in the meantime, until the next one, this is Luke signing off and telling you, please stay hatting. Ciao.